I see. Shoot.
Shoot is well said. Well, the most important thing that everyone should know is that really all events that will occur and roll over are completely engineered by the directive staff that directs this, even the natural disasters. If you take a look at the various prophecies of the so-called prophets and soothsayers, you will find congruent mention of two major regionally held wars in particular, which are to take place shortly after each other. One war in the Middle East region, with limited thermonuclear involvement. The second war with several flashpoints on Earth. Here the so-called prophecy remains imprecise, deliberately, of course, so that variable adjustments and improvisation can be made by the club and nobility for appropriate adaptation measures. The worst centers of war are to be Central Europe, the Middle East, the USA/Canada and East Asia. After that, a geophysical event is to occur that will purge the people due to all the destruction of nature and the resulting agony. Nevertheless, after all this torment there will be no bed of roses either, because the makers of this spectacle want to have their new old rule secured and confirmed by the existing prophecies, in the form of their descendants, who are to be the saviors and reshapers of the coming better age, just as they used to do.
So there is war that will decimate humanity.
Yes, but these wars are already preceded by tearing events, so people will be ill-equipped for the martial events. And after the short wars and the geophysical event, there will be great famines, diseases, and continued violence and brutality that will further decimate the number of people.
You have already briefly touched on the coming events. Could you be a little more precise?
Yes, I can, but at the risk of repeating myself. Well, everything is originally planned and initiated by a global economic and financial catastrophe, which possibly breaks out through a crazy act of violence, an attack or something. But that can also be triggered by something else, nothing violent. The financial catastrophe is only unleashed when the nobility and the club are ready to carry out the plan, accompanied or followed by a large contingent of controlled and directed people who will trigger riots and eventually civil war-like conditions in many regions of Europe, North America, and Asia. Chaos is setting in. In addition, terrorist individuals and gangs are then to strike out across Europe, covertly brought to Europe with the so-called refugee flows organized by lackey elites working more or less consciously for the nobility and the club, i.e. politicians, secret service organizations and media structures. Besides the economic chaos and civil insecurity that would then prevail, there would simultaneously be power cuts and cyber attacks on public facilities and nuclear power plants, allegedly perpetrated by terrorists, which worsened the general hardship and led to significant rates of disaster and supply shortages. I don't think I mentioned that yet, did I? Chaos and terror are being staged. Money will be devalued, politicians disempowered, people will look for culprits. Gradually, almost all over the planet, there will be incredibly harsh violence and lawlessness. Loss of wealth, raging anger, hunger, disease, and brutality. A complete or temporary breakdown of civil order. At about the same time as the economic and financial problems on Earth unfold, or a little later, a crisis must come to a head more violently in the Middle East, which brings some countries on the scene that are so directed by globally interconnected elites that warlike operations are portrayed in the media to their own populations in such a way that it should rattle so that it becomes historically comprehensible later on why the war was provoked, and that individual countries and nations judged the situation to the best of their knowledge and conscience. Enormous military conflicts should then follow in Europe, with partly thermonuclear explosives in the USA, the Middle East and parts of Russia. Chemicals and new bestial weapons will also be used. Then the geophysical event occurs that will literally shake everyone mentally and physically. The Earth's axis is teetering. The tsunamis and earthquakes, which have already been stronger and more numerous for several months, then devastate the coasts of entire countries far worse than the tsunami waves previously triggered by thermonuclear bombs. Volcanoes erupt, making survival in close proximity impossible. People go mad, wail, are helpless and plead, go insane. No matter what the nobility and the club then come up with in combination for this, whether the staged use of extraterrestrial intervention also happens, Jesus appears, or some other silly nonsense, everything is a lie. As a human being, you must not let yourself be deceived then, and you must remain strong, especially at this moment. For the worst is to be threaded through all this chaos. As a result of the overturning terrible as well as redemptive events, a government will be set up which will be presented as kind-hearted and honest, and which is to initiate and implement the further plans on the basis of that fateful and supernaturally interpreted hint for the world and humanity. As it were, as willed by God. On the basis of the events that have taken place, attempts will then be made to bring religions down to a common denominator, culminating in the common worship of a higher being, and will want to unite the countries, states and nations of this planet in an overall construct under a common peace, friendship, leadership, trade, exchange and economic relations. Opponents of this new emerging system will be rigorously persecuted. Everyone must be made fully registrable for life in this system, supposedly for security, development and order. A kind of functioning super-socialism will be attempted to be established, which will generate enormous prosperity, eradicate all inequalities and inspire the people. However, under extreme control, with means of reduced reproductive capacity, engineered deadly diseases, destruction of freedom of expression through public police and denunciation, power through body control, hidden killing at the push of a button and much more. Prosperity, basic income, eradication of inequality, technical progress are of course actually something good, but they must never take place under the condition of absolute control, lack of freedom, denunciation, the beginning of creeping biological digitalization, the development of AI that is uncontrollable or acts too independently, hidden poisoning via food or diminished reproductive capacity and much more. By such characteristics you recognize the control exercised over you, against which you must defend yourself by refusing to cooperate, en masse. And thus you can finally switch off the control. All the dramatic events before and during the apocalyptic time, as well as the horrific time afterwards, are then to justify, consolidate and confirm the logical pro-argumentation for a globally controlled world empire, in order to drive humanity in the corresponding direction of the planned digitalization of its biology. The whole sequence of events can also vary, as I said, especially at the beginning or end of the staged physical catastrophes. For example, in this scenario, the power elite could advertise the establishment of digital money as a solution to all existing problems, only to lead people into even deeper captivity. The whole thing could then be hyped by telling people that digital money is to be understood like Bitcoin or similar current currency revolutions. But these are all very different things. Bitcoin has nothing to do with digital money from a bank. So it will be a ploy to be able to establish a single, digital world currency. You have to resist such hype or such pressure to introduce it. Everyone. And you must not let yourself be persuaded, because of all the catastrophic things that have happened, that you now have to introduce a digital currency so that everything will be better no matter what reason the power elite cites. Sooner or later, the introduction of this global digital currency is to be followed by the establishment of a chip that goes under the skin for a more comfortable lifestyle and for reasons of security. So listen up. The digital currency is a trap that is only meant to lead all people into absolute slavery. But if all this happens, it is not yet certain that this will be the end of the production. Perhaps people will then be redeemed by Jesus, freed from their chipped world. So that people can then be made to believe that now, with the alleged Jesus, the real ruler reigns. Now that all countries and nations of the world are controlled by the club and nobility via the installed elitist constructs and secret societies, the network can present a global production that seems very real to the lowly ignorant elite lackeys, i.e. those who have been fed false knowledge or have little or no idea from the club and nobility what exactly is going to happen. This makes the spectacle all the more believable for the global populations. The higher flunkies, on the other hand, all know in great detail about the plan, what natural disasters are coming and how the countries of the world are to be staged on each other to achieve an absolutely controlled reordering on the planet with decimated populations. At least that is what they believe. Because they too will only be used elements.
So nothing is real? The earthquakes, the tsunamis? How can that be? Is the geophysical event also a deception?
A lot of the staged events will be natural disasters that are completely artificially induced. You can do that very easily. You will amplify a lot of it with electromagnetic and microwave techniques, similar to scalar and ELF wave techniques, which can be used very efficiently by the elites with little effort and little energy. With these wave techniques and some other matter manipulation techniques still unknown to humans, i.e. then with very active support of the club, the Earth's axis and even the magnetic poles will be additionally influenced. The geophysical event can be influenced in such a way that it either doesn't happen at all, doesn't have an effect, or happens much more extreme than expected. There's a lot to be said about this. But in fairness to the nobility in the club, and especially because of their belief in victory by this means, I must not divulge too much about it at this point.
What do the influenced seers and prophets say about this event?
The so-called prophets, diviners and clairvoyants speak in this context for the northern hemisphere of a 3-day eclipse and or a swaying of the Earth's axis accompanied by global earthquakes and possibly also volcanic eruptions, as well as an undefined cloud, which, however, seems to be limited to the northern hemisphere. There would also be violent tidal waves. The British, especially the English, should already take notice during armed conflicts in the Middle East and cross over to the continent in good time, even if it is already rattling in Europe, but only to central Spain, and look for a firm and closed domicile there. A solid and sealable dwelling house will be important, The same applies, by the way, to Danes, North Germans, Dutch, Belgians, and North French. In describing this cloud, whether it is of volcanic origin or due to the geophysical event, the prophecy remains vague and sometimes somewhat imprecise, but deliberately so, for it is an adaptation variance for the Northern Hemisphere knitted by nobility and club and improvisation possibility. Elsewhere on the planet, by contrast, there are supposed to be only tsunamis, earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, as well as famine and serious diseases. In the Northern Hemisphere, this will also happen, but possibly to a lesser extent. And in the Southern Hemisphere, the 3-day eclipse may last longer or not occur at all. For Europe and parts of the Northern Hemisphere, many of the so-called prophets emphasize that the cloud makes it impossible to survive outside a closed house. For this reason, doors, windows, and every small crack should be closed and sealed tightly so that the dust of this cloud does not get into the house. If you go outside into this dust, you die immediately. It is also mentioned that windows should be covered with dark paper and that no one should look out of them. That people should have consecrated or blessed candles in the house so that they can pray to the Blessed Virgin Mary, to Jesus Christ or to God, then nothing will happen to them. It would also help to repent of sins and to ask for forgiveness in those hours and days of distress, when everything is dark and you are desperate, while outside you can hear people dying in agony. All those who did not do this would not survive.
Yes. And what is behind it? What is being staged with this?
Special techniques are used to radiate energy onto the tectonic plates of the planet and onto certain geological stimulus points. This creates earthquakes, tsunamis, and volcanic eruptions that will cause a lot of chaos and destruction in certain regions of the Earth. This can be triggered with very little force. I must not go so far with the descriptions now, but I can say that these elitist circles want to create a scenario and a story with all their technical means and the many other technical influences of the club, which is then supposed to convince people that God sent them this chaos because of their fornication. And the proof of all this happening is underpinned here by so-called prophets and religions, as well as the many admonishing words of those who had always warned of all these catastrophes. Even esotericism and the alternative media then provide the proof that they had predicted this. But everything is a fraud. Everything. Even that is false, which has made people become so lewd and wayward over the last hundreds of years. This lewdness was also initiated by the club, nobility, and the elites among the people, by means of the circles of elitist secret societies and elites. All this misfortune comes from the same source. Therefore, all people must pay close attention to what is being presented to them. Most of it has been planned over a long period of time and thus could be planted in people's brains with many stories, myths, and modern sagas.
So everything is fake then. Nothing is real. And the catastrophes are fakes.
Well, real the catastrophes will be, but the originators and the reason for these events have nothing to do with well-meaning forces, a loving God, or the hyperdimensional quantum consciousness. They are the results of a pure orchestration by the club and the nobility, to initiate for a decimated humanity, via the path of a new world order, the digitization of human biology. This is what the club is and has been about always in all the past millennia. The goal for it, apart from quantum extraction, has never been anything else. That is why in Europe and possibly also in the USA, where people are very critical of supernatural phenomena because of their enlightened way of thinking, a situation that can be experienced religiously will be deliberately staged, which is to burn itself deeply into the consciousness of these actually enlightened people by means of a darkness taking place, deadly dust and mental delusions arising from it. The Earth's axis will be set into a kind of staggering and then into a tilted position. This influence will then also cause the complete elimination and reversal of the polarity of our Earth's magnetic field, which is already relatively weak at present, so that every person on Earth will be absolutely exposed to the cosmic radiation of outer space for a certain time. This radiation is composed of the so-called solar wind, a highly electrically conductive plasma, as well as the radiation from the Milky Way and the other galaxies of the cosmos, which also contain electrically conductive particles. The electromagnetic gamma radiation from quasars and other space objects can also reach the Earth's surface unhindered during this time. However, the solar wind, the electrically conductive plasma of the Sun, which then penetrates the Earth unhindered, is probably the biggest problem for us during this time. But it could also be a completely different source that then brings electrically conductive particles from space into the Earth's atmosphere. For example, particles from a planet X or a twin sun that graze the Earth's orbit. For the sake of simplicity, I'll stick to electrically conductive solar plasma. These electrical particles, no matter where they come from, then give rise to very bizarre mental phenomena and delusions that people will not clearly understand. One of the most impressive things about this time will be that people will begin to hallucinate due to the sudden loss of the Earth's magnetic field, and will not notice this, also because all electronic and electrical systems will fail or are destroyed that could give them information about what is happening on Earth. This makes most of them even more insecure and susceptible to all kinds of religious delusions. And they will not realize that they are hallucinating or understand why this is happening. They truly believe they see demons, hear voices, think someone is on their heels or trying to get into the house. Then they go out and die because the dust from the cloud, the electrostatically charged particles of the solar wind, comes into the house, or they breathe it in outside the house. Due to the hallucinations, they have feelings of guilt, believe that relatives or friends are at the door looking for help, or religiously exaggeratedly believe that the end of the world has come, and either kill themselves prematurely or at least have suicidal thoughts. They also murder each other in paranoid overzealousness because they think the other one wants to kill them. Absolute psychological madness. Besides the toxic effect of cosmic plasma in the Earth's atmosphere, in which you must not stay and from which you must protect yourself by means of well-sealed windows and doors, this hallucination hysteria will kill a lot of people. That is why there is also the weak double-meaning hint from these so-called prophets that during the 3-day darkness people should pray to Jesus, Mary, or the loving God, and keep consecrated candles burning. Because such mental focus on religious images and ideas will then be able to stabilize people mentally, because they are concentrating on something else. And this will help, because in this way people steer their psyche away from destructive thoughts and do not put themselves and others in mortal danger because of the hallucinations within these confused days. But behind this seemingly well-intentioned advice of the so-called seers and prophets lies calculation of the club and nobility. So that you should pray with consecrated or blessed candles so that you will be saved. This advice from the prophecy texts is supposed to make the purified survivors believe afterwards that this helped because they entrusted themselves to God and the saints. In this way, people bind themselves religiously again and also actively believe in higher powers and a Savior who will come to them. And this is exactly what people should experience and feel, so that the plans of the club and nobility can come to fruition. Because the totally despondent and frightened people will completely absorb this rubbish, and there will be a great many of them, and because of the lack of media enlightenment for a very long time and the chaos that prevailed for a long time, they will not be able to determine that their visions and the catastrophes had completely natural worldly causes, that they did not see demons at all, or that they had apparitions of God, Jesus, or Mary, but that they were merely paranoid hallucinations that arose from feelings of panic, fear, and remorse. The advice of the so-called prophets and diviners to have consecrated candles from priests or pastors in the house for the 3-day eclipse is something that only very few people will be able to take to heart anyway, because they did not prepare themselves anyway and therefore did not know anything about consecrated candles. But it is precisely this prophetic reference in the prophecies that will then, in reverse, once again make the surviving and purified people believe that all the past events were indeed the prophesied downfall of the world, and thus suggest that everything that happened was of supernatural and divine origin. Most people will not have the consecrated candles from the prophecy texts that the seers and prophets called for, which would possibly have prevented the demons from appearing. And that is the calculation of these alleged prophecies. For in this way a line of evidence is created that hardly anyone doubts after all these terrible and unbelievable experiences. Hardly anyone will suspect that these were only the symptoms of a briefly lost Earth magnetic field. After all, that's what the prophecies said. This is another reason why it will be burned in, because very few people in these coming days will realize how enormously dangerous undamped electrostatically charged solar plasma is in the oxygen atmosphere, and how the radiation field emanating from it affects the human brain or body. Especially not after all the catastrophes and seemingly supernatural experiences. Also because there is a lack of reliable clarification. As a result, all this will make people humble, religious, easily directed and molded for the old new ruling houses, and finally for the next important steps towards the New World Order. But besides the apparent protection and comfort that the consecrated candles are supposed to provide, there is also a really useful relevant reason to equip oneself with candlelight. Because electrical and electronic devices will be destroyed due to the radiation effect of the electrostatically charged particle plasma of the sun, they will no longer function or will only function in a limited or sporadic manner. Only candles will still be burning. And you should have them in the house. For enlightened people it doesn't matter at all whether these candles are consecrated by a priest or pastor or not, as announced in the prophecies. The main thing is to have them. For this time, it is also actually not important to pray to saints, to Mary, to Jesus, or to the Holy Father, but above all to realize that you are hallucinating considerably, and that you must not engage in rash actions. You have to focus your mind and psyche on something positive. Of course, you can pray to Jesus, Mary, or the Father, but by doing so you should not believe that the events are an act of vengeance by God or the like, but must know that the sender for all the horror are the club and the nobility who want to build a false religious renovation that is entirely under their control. So you should rather think about how and where to track down this old digital nobility afterwards. He is the first addressed to settle accounts. As for the time afterwards, it can only be said that the survivors of these events will have a very hard time. Not only because they have to grow their own food, there are no more medicines and no more usual medical care, or the infrastructure has completely collapsed, but above all because all electronic and electrical systems have been destroyed or are inoperative, and these people therefore have to think very differently. They have to manage without the many advantages of our numerous technical developments. They have to start from scratch. This will eventually kill many who have survived until then, because they lack any kind of help, support and care that is based on electronic systems. A cruel time. It is also worth mentioning that according to the so-called seers and prophets, after the severe catastrophes, due to the tilting of the Earth's axis, the rotation of the Earth will also be different, so that in many places on our planet, where it is still warm today, it will become cold, and in others, on the contrary, it will become warm and tropical.
Is there anything that can be done about the shortage? Against the loss of electronics and other useful things? Can we prepare ourselves?
There are many things you can do. Now, you can take precautions, protect yourself and think about what needs to be prepared. You can talk to your relatives and friends. As silly as this brooch to relatives and friends may seem, but nowadays it is not so absurd to talk about it. But it must not only be about purely material provisions for these difficult times. It must also be about being prepared to do something afterwards, to act against the perpetrators. It will be precisely this time afterwards that we will be able to do something effectively, because the digital nobility will have shot all their powder by then. No matter how the staged scenario is played out in detail and whether further strange events, diseases, famine and natural phenomena set in, it will be important to use this time. This will be the favor of tracking down the principles. They will not be squatting in caves and holes in the ground. As is often said in prophecies, these will only be the lackeys. They will also be reckoned with. But the real culprits will not be those who were visibly lynched, slain and murdered by the population during the events. These lackeys are of course also partly to blame in a moral sense, but they are not the originators. People must, however, search for the digital nobility and their blood relatives by remaining serious and stubborn in their search. Seek and you shall find. For there will be an opportunity to find and to recognize. Maybe some will be stuck in holes in the ground after all. Depending on how they change their strategy then. We will see.
So don't give up or get distracted. You said that you can prepare. But how can you prepare against all these things? It's so extensive, all the things you have to think about.
No, it's not that extensive, because that's what I'm mainly getting at. What has to be done if a family, a state, a company, a business or a person attaches importance to not starting completely from scratch after this disaster? In other words, if you don't want to start in the Stone Age, in the truest sense of the word. Therefore, it is important, in addition to the classic crisis precautions, to think carefully about how to preserve electronic and electrical devices for the time after the disaster. How states, countries, companies or every individual can save circuit boards, processors and chips, which are contained in almost all electrical devices today, from cosmic radiation and solar plasma.
How should it be possible to protect yourself from this enormous cosmic radiation then?
With metal, multi-sealed containers. This works excellently with simple aluminium foil, which is wrapped precisely and seamlessly around cardboard boxes or cabinets. Aluminium foil will be the tool of choice for the average citizen because it allows you to create multiple layers of metal that are separated from each other. A simple Faraday cage, e.g. a car, will not protect against the radiation fields building up in the Earth's atmosphere. Anything that is not tucked and hidden behind several layers of dense, closed metal or metal foil will be broken and cannot be made functional again. The solar wind, in particular, will become highly electrically charged when it enters the Earth's atmosphere. The ionized atomic nuclei of various elements and the protons and electrons of hydrogen will then literally create clouds on Earth that will kill everything that is not protected in well-sealed houses. Lightning, thunderstorms, electrical discharges, and storms will develop everywhere. These clouds do not have to form everywhere on our planet. In some places they can be less intense, because the solar plasma does not always enter the Earth's atmosphere evenly. By the way, you should not confuse this cloud with the cloud that will form in Europe as a result of military intervention. That is something different, contains pure poison.
But why should it be so important to save a few electrical things? The whole world will have no electricity anyway because of the destruction of the infrastructure. There are no computers, no mobile phones, and probably no refrigerators, hot plates, or cars. What is the point of saving anything?
Quite simple. The more technical equipment and systems that are left, the faster production can be restarted. This will not be in the first few years, but it will determine whether a state can return to its initial state before the disasters after 1 or only after 3 decades. That's why I talked about states, countries, and companies. It is possible to work with the salvaged equipment. At least some of it can be put back into operation. This will be laborious and idle at the beginning, but it will create an enormous advantage over other countries and areas of the world after a few years. Most important and best are discarded but functional and robust standalone computers or laptops. Spare parts, motherboards, keyboards, and monitors will also be worth more than gold and diamonds. Companies should keep a small stock of all their hardware in an underground room, sealed and secured all around with several layers of metal to the outside. In contrast, as an average person or small group of people, you don't necessarily need a room with complete metal encasement. For that it is enough to store devices and electronic hardware in boxes in a safe place, preferably in the basement, and to encase the boxes with several layers of metal or metal foil to the outside. Companies and businesses could assemble several Euro pallets, which they completely sheath with a wall of metal. These sheathed pallets are then completely surrounded by a damping layer of polystyrene, cardboard, or similar soft damping materials so that another layer of metal or light metal, such as aluminium, can then be wrapped or built around it. A soft damping layer is important so that several separate layers of metal can be created that are not in direct contact with each other, as this prevents overlapping stray radiation. The more separate metal layers there are, the better the destructive effect of the radiation emitted by the electrostatic solar particles is shielded and inhibited. Businesses, factories, and companies can work best with containers, cabinets, and boxes, each receiving its own metal sheathing, which is then stowed in the next larger metal sheath unit. What companies, factories, businesses, and private individuals want to rescue in this securing process, i.e. which spare parts, machines, equipment, circuit boards, etc., is something everyone has to decide for themselves. Besides weighing up what is most important, the most I can recommend is the principle, the more, the better. Aluminium foil is not only a very inexpensive method of protecting electronic devices for private individuals, it also offers good precautionary protection for owners of small companies who cannot or do not want to protect themselves with a complicated backup of containers, cabinets, and large rooms. It is also recommended for medium-sized companies to protect important inventory and individual parts of production and manufacturing machinery. Because one thing is certain, Simply ordering spare parts for electronic and electrical systems after such a cosmic radiation and plasma fire will no longer be possible. So take precautions when you see the first globally terrifying events coming. If you are not yet completely numb, you will clearly recognize the event that marks the beginning and onset of the catastrophes. The same applies to the ordinary citizen. They should put together a similar package of electrical and electronic equipment consisting of smaller and larger boxes, suitcases and cabinets wrapped in aluminum foil for the metal layer. In the smallest box or suitcase he has to pack all the equipment he wants to save. Laptops with disk drives will probably be the most coveted, because you can use a computer for many things. But above all, the ordinary citizen has to think of all the devices that he or she already needs indispensably for daily survival. For example, medical and other technical aids. These devices should definitely be put in there. In addition, people should think about petrol or diesel power generators. Or they should think about buying a small portable AGM battery system with solar panels. In other words, a mobile solar power system. Two-way radios become very important. Pocket radios and mobile phones that have radio reception, measuring devices of all kinds, a decent number of household batteries of all sizes, electric wristwatches and wall clocks, alarm clocks, lamps, LED torches, hot plates. Also entertainment devices such as ebooks, tablets, MP3 players, digital and film cameras, headphones, portable hard drives, USB sticks, power supplies. For individuals with more space, a portable mini fridge with a power-saving compressor is also recommended. Kitchen or garden appliances, even if some of it may seem almost a bit too luxurious. If you can save more electronics, you should save as much as possible, even seemingly superfluous items. The list of what to pack is long and is up to each one. Above all, you should also think about things that are essential for later reconstruction or devices that are important for preserving personal digitally stored documents. This means hard drives, USB sticks, disk drives or disk players. If you have stored your data on CDs, DVDs or Blu-rays, these data are safe on them because these data carriers are insensitive to the radiation of electrostatic solar particles. They do not need protection. Whoever then still has enough aluminum foil left over to wrap their card tightly and hermetically shielded in several layers can do that, too. Even if it will be quite difficult. It might be one of the few people who will still be able to drive around in enormous luxury, but also very dangerous. So, which electronic devices and things you want to save is up to you. The list is individual, but you should definitely think of essential utensils. Of course, it is also important to think about emergency supplies, because without them nothing works, i.e. food, water, medicines, equipment for food acquisition and survival, important manuals, etc. This is a very long list, so I won't go into details here.
Electronic devices will be important for rebuilding civilization. But isn't pure survival much more important first? So to be able to take care of the most necessary needs, the procurement of food, as you just mentioned?
Yeah, sure. Of course. However, a civilization and a state, a country or a nation will be able to restart better and easier if it has certain technical resources and does not have to start completely from scratch again. That will help all people. That means not only better personal opportunities or capabilities or a shorter time of suffering, but also considerable competitive advantage over other countries in rebuilding. That will be very important, perhaps even decisive, for a country and its people and who will set the tone on Earth in the future. And that is also significant, vis-a-vis nobility and club. Imagine all electronics destroyed. Then no computer, no mobile phone, no network works. TVs and radios don't work, nor does the car or local transport. No automatic electrical system is running. Everything lies fallow. There will be considerable supply problems because people cannot make do with cars. The most they can do is ride bicycles, and many bicycles only during the day, because most people today use an electric LED light for lighting, and that will be gone too. It will be very difficult to get food, and dangerous too.